Almost 30 years ago, Claire and I picked up a leaflet from a little nursery in Clotton near Tarporley. It was promoting the Alpine Garden Society, and we decided we would give it a try. The first thing we did was go to shows, and among the first shows was one in March of 1994, staged by the East Lancs group in Whitworth Civic Hall. That show turned out to be a revelation for three very separate reasons. The first reason was the wonderful welcome that we received from the East Lancs group. The second was the superb Lancashire hot pot served at lunch, and which persuaded us to join the group on the spot. The third was miniature gardens, and as soon as I saw them, I thought, I can do that. This talk started as a workshop on miniature gardens for display at Alpine Garden Society shows, and I like to think it's encouraged a few to have a go. My hope now is that this particular talk will encourage a few others to think, I can do that. Troughs and miniature gardens, of course, are not new. This lady, Anne Ashbury, published in 1952 a book showing a whole range of gardens, typified by this one, which she made for the Queen when she was Princess Elizabeth, aged 11. As you can see, it's a trough, and it contains accessories, of which much more later. Our understanding of troughs is much as it has always been, but what about our current understanding of pots for show? For an Alpine Garden Society show, the pot may be any size up to 36 centimetres diameter, or, if not round, up to 1,000 square centimetres, a little under 32 centimetres square, and may be of any material. For Scottish Rock Garden Club shows, size is unlimited. I prefer terracotta pots, high-five for frost resistance of course, but plastic is fine on grounds of weight. None are easy to find close to the 36 centimetre limit, so most show pots tend to be a little smaller. Troughs, of course, may be any size, but mobility will be a serious factor when weight is considered. Whether pot or trough, drainage is most important. Inert granular material of any kind may be used, even including polystyrene beads if weight is important. Shown is a crushed form of leaker, lightweight expanded clay aggregate, which offers the advantage of both holding moisture and efficient drainage. Troughs, of course, may be constructed of a wide variety of materials, including stone, concrete, polystyrene, hypertufa, etc. And as Robert Rolfe says in the 2020 December edition of the Alpine Garden, it doesn't matter to the plants whether these were fashioned a fortnight, a decade, or even centuries ago. While I will show a variety of plants suited to trough and pot culture, it is worth looking at Robert's article for a very comprehensive list of suitable plants. Everyone has their own ideas for composts. My own preference is for 2/3 John Innes and 1/3 grit. For mini gardens and for troughs, each of which will be at least semi-permanent plantings, it's important for the compost to be well drained and initially mildly nutritious. A long-term fertilizer such as bone meal will meet the plant's need for long enough for them to establish. After that, I tend not to feed. So what to use for the landscape? Tufa is a variety of limestone formed when carbonate materials precipitate out of ambient temperature water. While it's a limestone, it seems to be acceptable to a wide variety of plants, and is certainly a popular choice for mini gardens in particular. Tufa often contains remains of fossils, tree branches, leaves, and is more or less porous, ranging from very soft to very hard and from white to brown. While tufa is a well-favoured choice, it is increasingly difficult to find and may be quite expensive. Hypertufa is a composite formed of sand, fine bark or peat and cement, and can be used to make troughs or simulated rocks, but may be susceptible to frost. This picture shows the porosity of tufa. Asperula, planted on the left-hand side, has grown right through to the other side, where it is in full sun and flowers earlier. Some years ago, we acquired a quantity of schist on the island of Anglesey. It tends to have very good colour, texture, and very nice shapes. Sometimes it has veins of quartz, which add to its attractive character. This piece of schist has been in the garden for some years and is certainly enhanced by the moss that grew on it. Excellent for building height in troughs. Limestone, of course, comes in various colours and is excellent for crevice gardens, especially thin pieces with a bit of form. Lakeland slate, it's not my preference. It tends to be rather chunky and the colours a little bit much and not quite so easy to match with plant and trough colours. Welsh slate, of course, is very thin and is ideal for very fine crevice construction. At the same time, you can choose any material which you feel will give you the result that you have in mind. Tufa, left in the garden, especially in shade, is soon covered in moss. However, spraying with bathroom cleaner or moss killer will kill most of it off, and application of a stiff brush will allow the rock to be clean to taste. I prefer tufa lumps broken down. Use drill and wedge to split them rather than saws, which can leave very unnatural surfaces. Of course, vertical cliffs may need to be sawn, but then should be knocked about to create a natural effect. Very hard tufa often has pockets and crevices, which may be planted when drilling or splitting prove rather difficult. Building a landscape. Fill any pot or trough up. It's so much easier to remove excess compost than to add more. Start out thinking about the height you have in mind and fill accordingly. Gather the rocks together and start to imagine how you want it to look. With tufa, assemble lumps to create the landscape. Take time as you build height and leave enough of a moat to plant the edges and perhaps a flat area for effect. Don't rush with the layout. Go back to it tomorrow and tomorrow until you're happy with how you think it will finish. Create lots of crevices. Here the drabber, you can see, is already established in a lump of tufa from an earlier creation and being recycled is already in bud. Fill the gaps with compost and start to plant. Again, don't be in a hurry to finish. Let the garden evolve as you go. If your choice is for a crevice garden, you'll certainly need many more pieces than this, but you could use the same rocks, but in the form of a mountain range, again leaving just enough space for plants around the edge. Fill up between the mountains with compost to show height before starting to plant. This pot was planted on a Tuesday and went to a show 4 days later and was complimented as being well established. looking nicely overgrown and with good contrast between plants and rocks for a natural look. This can only be achieved with well-established plants and plenty of them. With tufa, build levels well above pot and keep planting to fill all the gaps. Vertical walls of tufa are effective, but may take time to develop. Shrubs can be effective growing up the wall. Gardening on this monumental scale, of course, demands assistance, especially for us old codgers whose mountain climbing abilities waned a long time ago. On the level in the garden, we're well served with our willing and indefatigable little helper. But in the mountainous landscape of mini gardens, we need to employ more specialist skills. So meet Jürgen, our full-time mini garden assistant. He's skilled, eats very little, and never complains. Choosing plants. How many plants will you need? It takes plenty and is a very personal preference. Seedlings, rooted cuttings, offsets, bought-in plants, plunged in their pots or planted into nursery troughs, and mushroom boxes work very well for that, until they're needed. A typical mini garden could need anything from 20 to 30 plants or more. Mushroom boxes are excellent as nursery troughs, being quite deep. It is worthwhile when creating drainage to leave a reservoir at the bottom to help avoid drying out. Once planted out, it doesn't take long for fresh planted alpines to achieve a good size. And of course, there is a vast range of plants from which we may choose, such as... Let's start with shrubs. Top left is Ulmus parvifolia Hokkaido, the dwarf Chinese elm, sometimes apparently known as lazy man's bonsai. Top right, Euonymus japonicus Rocugio variegata from China. The rugged look comes from being occasionally moved in and out of the miniature garden. And at the bottom, Hebe Buchanani minor from New Zealand, easy from cuttings and easily trimmed to keep in character. Kalmiopsis leachiana from the Siskiyou Mountains in southwest Oregon, and any species of Daphne, both slow growing, and the scent from particularly the Daphne is excellent. Really good in pots or troughs. Slow growing Daphne modesta from China and Carokia cotoneasta Little Prince from New Zealand can both be trimmed to keep a nice compact form. Globularia repens. The repens says it should be flat on the ground, but repeated in and out of the mini garden as before resulted in this small tree. Very effective. For troughs, particularly large troughs, the very dwarf fuchsias are excellent. This one, Tom Thumb. Prune hard in spring to keep them short. Conifers are also best in troughs, but only choose very dwarf varieties. Plant conifers below the top of mountains and be prepared to replace them when they get too big. This is a very early Antipodean pot with Hebe, Clematis and Raulia. The schist looks really good, but the gravel, well, I think that might be better. Pack plants in when flowering for best effect. One of the most effective in early spring is Primula wanda. Choose offsets from the garden with lots of buds and it will flower for weeks. See them. They come in such a variety of colour and forms, many of them self-sowing readily and quite hardy. Naming sedum has never been one of my strong points, but I reckon so long as the plants know what they're called, does it really matter. The bottom one at the right has now cleverly been identified by Carol Kellett as Sedum annuum. Where you want to have ground cover, Veronica altensis and Silene corlis will each provide an evergreen base. Veronica from Turkey, of course, and the Silene from all over the Northern Hemisphere. Do choose carefully with the Silene to make sure you get one with a good colour. Saxifragas, there are so many to choose from. They grow extremely well in tufa, and they are great at creating forms even when they're out of flower. Try to choose in flower for best effect. The Saxifraga hybrid Satchmo makes a nice pot plant with a fairly shallow mound, but is very floriferous. And the Sax appositifolia, which is found in the UK and European mountains, it drapes superbly on steep slopes and over the edge of pots and troughs. It's very reliable. These two are excellent self-sowers. The Sax cymbellaria, with its shiny foliage, flowers over a very long time if dead-headed. And the Erinus alpinus grows very well in tufa, but again try to select a seedling with a really good colour. Some are rather dull. Leontopodium alpinum. I put this in just because I was so amused by the pot, the miniature garden. Looked as though it was cooking. Done to a turn. Wood mark 4. Primula allioni is native to southern France and northern Italy, and there are many, many hundreds of cultivars. Best chosen again in full flower. Primula auricula is a beautiful thing, one of my absolute favourites, and comes from Central Europe. For something to fill gaps and spread easily, Sempervivum really is second to none. If you can find small rosetted varieties of Sedum arachnoideum, these have best effect and keep the larger rosette varieties for troughs. Here's an arachnoideum in a trough, which a photograph taken in Prague. And what about bulbs? Often seen as snowmelt flowers, but look for the dwarf varieties for use in landscapes. Here, the nivalis, which is the ordinary snowdrop, and Galanthus magnet, which I particularly like. If you want to go for narcissus, try the small forms of bulbocodium. Or if you can get it, and you can get it to work, Narcissus asturiensis, another of my absolute favourites. If you want to see it in the wild, you have to go very early to see it growing through the snow in northern Portugal and Spain. Crocus. There's not much to say about crocus. There are so many varieties, dwarf varieties, and they're absolutely brilliant, whether it's in troughs or in mini gardens. They work so well. Arantis, woodland habits in France, Italy and the Balkans, and an Irish species native to Russia is reticulata. Many multicoloured hybrids exist of Iris reticulata. Sternbergia from the Mediterranean basins and Central and Southwest Asia, I don't find this too easy. But Chionodoxa, Lucili alba and Muscari, absolutely no problem at all. Totally reliable. Another of my real favourites is Scilla bifolia rosea from Central and Southern Europe. See the fascinating bud clusters. It's quite short flowering, but definitely well worthwhile. And Scilla michenkoana from the South Caucasus and Iran. Very reliable and always a really good solid colour. Polyxena corymbosa from South Africa. I'm not sure if that's the right name. I'm never quite sure of the species names for Polyxena. And the ornithogalum, well, that in southern Europe is so common, and it's a very reliable and very dwarf plant. Rhodohypoxis. There is a thought sometimes that rhodohypoxis don't survive too well in the garden, but I can assure you that in mini gardens and in troughs, it really works well. Again, choose the dwarfest varieties for best effect. Cytherinchium. This one is Devon Skies. Clump species, and it's one of the several. They don't become a nuisance. They don't sell so as some of the more common varieties do. Campanulas. Well, there are many campanulas, of course. These two will grow in the Italian and Swiss Alps and really grow very, very well in tufa. Campanula cochlearifolia, whether in blue form or in the alba form. They colonize gravel so readily and are so floriferous. And another real favourite of mine, the superb colour and form of Campanula crosswalkii Puck. It also colonizes gravel very readily. In the same Campanulaceae are Edryanthus, Glycicae and Pumilio here from the Balkans. I've just started with these and I'm quite hopeful. Dianthus, dwarf dianthus, and compact particularly. Gentians, well worth trying, though they may take a little while to establish. Erigeron scopulinus is a beautiful little daisy. It comes from the southwest USA and will cascade over the edges of a pot or a trough and has a very long flowering time. And a few specials. Physoplexis comosa, another one from the mountains. Tufa or Tufa crevis, choose a good form. Herbaceous, this is a Talinum or Femoranthus. It spreads slowly, but look at the colour of the flower and the foliage. They are superb together. It comes originally from southwest Colorado. Another European one. The Pulsatilla verna, it's so beautiful either in bud or in full flower. It may be with this one that it's worthwhile putting a little leaf mould into the planting hole. How about managing the planting once you've already got it? Well, first you'll need a toolbox. And working mini gardens needs a specialist toolbox. First, a deep cutter for removing plants with the least possible disturbance. Then a large spade for use in large holes. And a small spade where space is rather more limited. A border fork. This helps remove plants with the least damage. And tweezers, well, they facilitate removal of dead material from difficult places and also help hugely in planting in narrow holes. Secateurs. You might think that these are nail clippers, but I can assure you they work brilliantly for trimming small shrubs. And a moss scrubber. It's a stiff toothbrush treated to a number 2 haircut and is perfect for scrubbing moss from tufa. An old screwdriver bit is a really ideal way of drilling into the soft versions of tufa. In hard tufa, that's a different thing. You need then something a little bit more powerful. Planting in tufa. You can see here how they drill. It's in a brace and bit. It works really well. Just go very firmly and keep going until eventually, in this case at least, you go right through. And you leave a really tidy hole. The plant I chose here was a Campanula raineri. Tip it out of its pot and then try to get rid of as much of the soil as possible. Bare-rooted plants tend, in my view, to work best when you're planting into miniature gardens. Just take it carefully, don't be too brutal, keep as much of the root as you possibly can. And when you're at that stage, look at the plant closely, see if you can find a cutting. Here we are, here's one that's ideal. Separate it as carefully as you can with a little root. And finally, prepare your plant for planting. Here's the tufa that we drilled. And the idea is, take the tweezers, grip the plant towards the end of the roots, and get your tweezers to push the roots far down into the hole. This is particularly important when the hole is blind. But when the hole goes right through, of course, you can lift the tufa and pull the roots through from the other side to settle the plant into the hole very thoroughly. Then, of course, the roots are directly onto the compost and will settle very quickly. The cutting, well, that's to go in the other hole. In this case, it's a blind hole. Fill up the hole with, use the small spade and put in really gritty compost. Firm it in, the end of a pencil or a paintbrush works very well. And water well. Planting in the mini garden is a slightly different matter. Here we have a piece of tufa alongside a gap, which is perfect to have a plant inserted. Pull out the tufa, pull out any weeds that you find. You will get weeds in these creations. That's the little oxalis. I don't mind it as a plant, it looks okay, but it can get a little bit over the top. Then use the deep cutter to make sure you cut a tidy hole and do least possible damage to the plants around the hole. Use the big spade to create a hole big enough to accommodate whichever plant it is you've chosen. In this case, I decided to plant this severe. Not the most ideal for a demonstration, since it doesn't have an awful lot of roots, which you'll see. Again, gently break away the soil to leave as little as possible on the roots. Often it's worthwhile squeezing the roots together. In this case, it doesn't have that great an effect. But nevertheless, there it is, ready for planting. Push the roots as far down into the hole as you can, and then push them to one side so they go into the, well, first top up with gravel or with compost. Now push the roots sideways until they're under that piece of tufa which is above. Top up with compost. And firm thoroughly. Water, always as well, to make sure that when you plant it, it needs wetting. And then replace the tufa. The top dressing, of course, can be anything you choose. In this case, it was a spar which came from an old quarry in Derbyshire, which contrasted rather nicely with the tufa. And there it is. Hopefully, it looks as though it's been there all its life. Now, a question of protection. Do they need protection, these pots, these miniature gardens and troughs? This is where our miniature gardens live, and the troughs too. It's at the back of the house, facing south, and so gets the full sun and can be quite devastating. We have now put a canopy up over the patio door so we can provide some shelter. Our biggest problem is, from protection point of view, is blackbirds, pigeons and magpies. And I find that this centimetre weld mesh folded so that it grips the troughs works really very well. If you need more protection, then you can put fleece over the mesh, and that really works extremely well. It may be that you need support of the mesh, and a piece of bent metal or even a small plant pot inverted will do the job very nicely. Rosie Turner, of course, went a little bit further with her architect designed cover for a crevice bed. Do they need protection against cold? Well, no. The mini gardens are actually enhanced, in my view, by the frost and look really attractive when they are covered with hoar like this. In 2009, when we had a late snow, all the pots and troughs, of course, were covered. Here, the mini garden, absolutely perfectly protected under a blanket. In the wild, plants are protected by the covering of snow from excessive frost and wind and are in fact relatively dry until the snow melts, of course. Since this was March, the temperatures went up fairly quickly and you can see the snow receding. Within a day or two, there it is, revealing all the magic of what was beneath, just waiting for the snow melt. And now, complete. The snow is all gone and the garden is ready to show. The garden went to a show the following Saturday. If you decide to show your mini garden, which I really hope you will, see some of the competition you might expect. The Mini Garden Easy leaflet, which was produced for the Chelsea show some years ago, inspired Peter Hood to start a garden. He asked my advice and I suggested he might try to increase the height. Well, Peter certainly took me at my word because it grew. Debate eventually centred on whether it was held together with super glue or elastic bands. It is just absolutely brilliant. Here is a really lovely woodland effect garden by Stanley Prato with a nice combination of plants in full flower. Lovely. And this one, well, it's just a display of spring stuff. The draba flowering well up on the left, the saxifraga positifolia up on the right, and the others just waiting for a little bit more warmth, probably, to be able to come too. Ian Instone preferred a crevice garden, and he decided to make it all with androsarchy. Patience is its own reward as the plants develop and take over the appearance of the garden. What a difference when in flower. This is a camera photo, so not one of the best, but gives a really good impression of ambition realized. And why not try a little one? These are a pair that I put in some years ago as a non-competitive exhibit. The first time I did one of these, it was a challenge from Jim McGregor. I said I thought the idea was a little potty. But the judges' humour won through. The 3.5-inch garden was awarded a second place and a certificate as well, a certificate of cultural consolation. But what about troughs? Troughs can be made of anything. Robert Rolfe puts it quite simply in the December 2020 Alpine Garden. It doesn't matter to the plants whether these were made a fortnight or a decade or a century earlier. Here just a few of a large collection in Cliff and Sue Booker's new garden. Great variety. And here a limestone layer cake, as I like to think of it, with cushion plants, well established as a hanging gardens. Harlow Car sports a number of troughs of different layouts. Here's one with a nice landscape. Labels are a little intrusive, of course, because they're needed for public display. At home, try a different approach to labels or leave the plants to remember their own names. Moss on the trough certainly helps. One trick for discreet labelling is mucky thumb labels. Engrave a flexible label using a Dremel or similar and, when needed to be read, rub over with a mucky thumb. Alternatively, write the label with a fine black marker, then fold the label tight and bury beneath the surface so as to avoid the weather and the birds. Not to my taste, this one. It's a crude layout and large labels obscure the plants. It's rather thrown together. This is a lovely design. The tree is effective being against the wall and the cascade at the front sets it all off perfectly. Small labels in this case are not too intrusive. One taken in Prague. Oh dear. The rocks don't match. They're too clumsy. No, let's go on. Let's not worry too much about that one. It really needs a rethink. And how about landscaping using troughs? This is the 2004 AGS stand at Tatton Park. Both pots and troughs lend themselves to creating attractive layouts in the garden, as shown here. Here you can see lightweight polyurethane foam troughs, ceramic pot and brick constructions. With a little ingenuity, even water features are possible. This Alpine Garden Society display at Tatton Park in 2018 was awarded the best exhibit in the National Plant and Plant Heritage Marquee and the Holford Medal, awarded to the best exhibit staged by an amateur or a group of amateurs at an RHS show in 2018. It's a splendid example of pots and troughs used to decorate a stand. This is a different type of layout with troughs. This is in Scotland, in Ian and Maggie Young's garden. Many of the troughs were made by Ian, and he used a commercial sand and cement mortar mix. If you look at Ian's bulb log number 41 from 2008, you'll see how he does it. Harlow Carr in the Alpine House have landscaped quite considerably, but left plenty of space for pots to decorate the overall picture. And as an alternative to troughs and pots, try hollow stumps dotted around flower beds. This again from the 2004 AGS stand at Tatton Park. Now for a bit of fun. The genius of Van Vale inspired the use of accessories, but it took a while to get them accepted for AGS shows. The change encouraged the kids to join in too, as you will observe here. No matter how good the accessories, of course, it takes good plants for a show exhibit. I like this better. What a really wonderful picture Anna's created with this one. Great imagination. Great imagination. Lovely. And here's a wonderful idea. I'd give it 12 months to fill out, and then a fresh newspaper, and it'll be ready to go. This one, complete with roofers and gardeners. And to end, just a few very special examples. First, a couple of troughs. This concrete trough, photographed some years ago in Prague, offers great prospects. It is simply fabulous landscaping and must have taken quite a long time to put together. I'd love to see it now. And here's one where the landscaping is entirely to do with the plants. This one by Howard Humphreys, an East Lancs member who sadly is no longer with us. He needed to build special handling tackle to get it in his van for the Glasgow show. It's spectacular. And finally, a few of my all-time favourite mini gardens. There's something very elegant about this design. I wonder if it will look any better when the plants flower. A lady came to the Kendal show in 2016 with this amazing garden. She joined the Alpine Garden Society on the day so that she could enter. A woodland garden, always difficult with so few small woodland plants. Simply brilliant landscape with the water trickling down into the pond with its superb effect from the glaze. It's so imaginative, and I'm so jealous. Brenda Worsley's effort was magical too and tasted great. It was entirely edible. The sugar work included the pot, the rocks, the gravel, and the flowers. I immediately gave it a first and a certificate of merit. We could do with more of these. Wow, this is just simply a fantastic use of a very ornate, large chunk of hard tufa with lots of planting holes and wonderful elevation in a perfectly chosen broken pot. It's a proper hanging garden. This mini garden was produced particularly for Chelsea, along with a newly produced easy leaflet on mini gardens. In close-up, you can see the wide variety of different plants that have been packed in together. Finally, my all-time favorite. I do hope that something in the talk has inspired a few to say, I can do that. If you feel that way, please just do it. It's not hard to begin, it's not hard to get a result, and it's real fun. And with that, it's goodbye from me. Oh, and it's goodbye from him too. Goodbye.